Good.
Hello, everyone. This is Reverend Richard and Reverend Chelsea. I'm here interviewing Reverend Chelsea for a graduate newsletter. Reverend Chelsea, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. It's a cold, chilly, rainy day here in New York, but I get to work from home today, so it's kind of nice and snuggly.
Well, thank you again for joining us. It's really a pleasure to have you. And I wanted to interview you for the graduate newsletter to give everybody a little bit of a better chance to know who you are, because you are busy running around behind the scenes, and a lot of people know your name, but they don't often have a chance to see your face or to hear your wonderful voice. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to sort of introduce you to the graduate community at large, and to introduce you to people that might not otherwise get to meet you. So let's just jump right in. I always like to start with the same question. So can you please just tell me a little bit about yourself and what brought you to OneSpirit?
That's a great question. Well, what brought me to OneSpirit is a pretty magical story. I don't know how quickly I can tell it, but I was at a workshop, and upstate, I was working at the Omega Institute, where I've spent many wonderful summers working on seasonal staff. And I overheard two women say, they were just talking, we were on a break from our workshop, and they said something about OneSpirit in New York City. That's all I heard. And I felt something come over me, and sort of an inner voice saying, you have to know what that is. And so I asked them, and I said, excuse me, what's OneSpirit in New York City? And they said, oh, that's an Interfaith Seminary. And that was like a foreign phrase to me. Like nothing about that phrase really made sense. But for some reason, I knew I had to look into it. And I remember looking it up on my computer that night, and I was like laughing, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to do this program. And the school year had already started, and I remember leaving a message for Susan Turchin saying, I know you started your classes already, but I have to do your program, so let me know how that will work. And the next day she called and said, how soon can you get an application in? So, yeah, it was a pretty powerful, I've had this happen often in my life, but it was a really powerful message that I received.
So you really were inspired to come and join OneSpirit.
Yeah, yeah. I think I still didn't really know what I was getting into. It wasn't like I looked at the website and I was like, oh my gosh, this looks amazing. It was like, okay, cool. I know I have to do this, it just like somehow something made sense. And I had been on a spiritual journey for a long time. At Omega, I was introduced to a lot of different spiritual practices, and I was really agnostic. I might even still use that word for myself. But I had grown up in a really conservative evangelical Christian household, and I rejected that pretty early on. But I always felt something really moving in me. So somehow ministry seemed to make sense.
Well, I'm curious, were you able to get into that first class, or did you have to wait an entire year?
No, I got into that class. I was accepted probably a day or two after the first semester class, September class. So I just listened to it on audiobook and sent in my paperwork and everything. So it worked out.
That's a really, really great story. And of course, we're all very, very grateful that you were able to join us at OneSpirit, because you've been such an amazing addition to our community. Now, you mentioned that you were spending time at the Omega Institute in the summers. What other spiritual journeys or paths had you been on before you came here?
It's hard to define because it's always been very, I mean, since I sort of rejected the church at a young age. I mean, I was like 12 or 13, I think. And something that has been a huge part of my spiritual journey, but in an indirect way. I mean, a very direct way, but not like I was trying out different spiritual paths. I was in a performing group for about 5 or 6 years, and we toured the world, basically. And so I did 7 3-month tours, 5 of which were in different countries. So I spent a lot of time overseas, 2 tours in Japan, 3 tours around Europe. And there were things happening in my life that were very mystical. You know, I was, and I didn't really have that word then. I didn't really have that language, but I kept getting, you know, like synchronicities and the feeling of like, oh wow, I'm supposed to know this person. You know, I started really feeling something that I would now call the spirit or the divine or whatever moving in me. And also because I was with so many people from different countries and different cultures, you know, it was like everyone's different, but everyone's the same. And it's kind of the same with all of these spiritual traditions, like the same, you know, the mystical core that we talk about at OneSpirit. Like you can see that in people, you can see that in faith traditions, et cetera, et cetera. So it really kind of made sense when I found OneSpirit and people talking about this thing that I had experienced for a long time.
So it really was a great fit for you right away.
Yeah. And it's hard to name any specific paths I was part of because I did a lot of Buddhist meditation and yoga at Omega, and lots of earth-based practices. And so it's been a real mix.
Wow. So how did the 2 years that you spent as a student here at OneSpirit, how did that impact your life? I know that it had a very, very grand impact in a lot of ways. So can you talk about that a little bit?
The greatest impact was finding out about sacred activism. That's the thing that's made the most sense in my life, and is definitely where my ministry lies now. It's just made, sorry, my computer is beeping.
I was wondering if it was one of my devices.
No. Yeah, I mean, just even finding out about sacred activism was like, oh, this is exactly why I'm in this program.
Yeah.
That's probably been the biggest change. And I mean, and biggest change, it's like I found out what I was supposed to do. You know what I mean? It's like it was always there, and just needed to come up in the right way. So
yeah. Well, you are one of the most active people in our OneSpirit community, and you are active in lots of different ways, lots of different capacities. Can you talk a little bit about what you do here at OneSpirit so that the graduates will have a better understanding of your role here on staff, and also being involved with sacred activism?
Sure. So sacred activism is sort of how I got hired at OneSpirit. When I was a student, I really saw a need for more directed action to be happening with OneSpirit in Action in particular, that they really needed someone on, because I was volunteering with them, and it was clear that they really needed someone on staff to sort of be the liaison between this group of volunteers and the staff. And so I'm in that position, which has really helped OneSpirit in Action have a little bit more institutional energy behind it, logistically speaking. And so that's been really great. I coordinate volunteers here for all of our classes, our seminary classes, ISC, all of the electives, our info sessions. If you want to volunteer, let me know. Graduation and intensives are coming up, so we definitely need some great volunteers for that. And I had to put that little plug in, always looking for.
Well, absolutely.
And then I also take care of most of our communications here at OneSpirit. So I do our weekly newsletter and social media. That's probably why most people know my name, because they see me on Facebook. So
yeah. So you're really involved in a lot of different ways. There are a lot of different things that you do, and you kind of created this position here at OneSpirit. You sort of came in and said, I want to do this, which I think was really, really admirable. I thought it was amazing that you had done that. I had the distinct privilege of being a dean's assistant for your second year at OneSpirit. So that was a lot of fun. That was one of the greatest things that I ever got to do here at OneSpirit, was to volunteer for a second year class and sort of walk through another seminary class with them. And it was really wonderful to watch you go through that. It was a lot of fun. And then now to get to work with you has been tremendous. It's been really, really amazing. So would you consider OneSpirit your ministry now, or do you do things outside of OneSpirit as well?
I do a lot outside of OneSpirit. My partner and I live in an intentional community in Brooklyn. We have a house here, and there are 4 of us who live here, and we're called the Brooklyn Center for Sacred Activism. And one of the main things, there are 2 main things that we're doing right now in terms of bridging spirituality and social justice. So a lot of it came from when I was at OneSpirit. I kept wishing that all of these wonderful, amazing, love-filled people had a way to sort of put that love and compassion into real action in the world. And when I went to activist meetings, I kept wishing that all of the spiritual people were there to sort of help ground the activists and soften the activists, because there's a lot of cynicism and burnout. So that's some of what we're doing here at our house at the Brooklyn Center for Sacred Activism. So we host groups every week where we do self-care. We actually organize around spiritually based activism. So we're really creating a community out here of sacred activists. And we're also, Leo and I, he's my partner, and he also went to OneSpirit. We are now offering spiritual direction, one-on-one sessions with people, mainly activists and those who are spiritual but not religious, or have a spirituality that does not fit into one box. So that's kind of my biggest ministry right now.
So you are busy in lots and lots of different ways. So in all of these different areas in your life and all the different ways that you've been making a difference in the world, not only through OneSpirit, but through your ministry outside OneSpirit as well, what have been your greatest challenges, and what have been your greatest gifts in those realms for you?
In ministry in general, or OneSpirit, or?
Whatever comes to mind, whatever you think is important.
It's a really good question. I think personally, I've been wrestling with busyness. It's like, how do we make a difference when we have so much to I don't want to say worry, but I mean, paying the bills and paying rent and eating, keeping
all the plates spinning and all the moving parts moving.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes, so those things to me are really, really part of the system that I'm trying to change. Like I want to see a world where we're not stuck in wage slavery and the destruction of rampant individualistic capitalism. I mean, these are the things I think about a lot and am trying to change in the world. And so, but I have to live in that world as well. So that's, so those very things that I'm doing are sort of perpetuating the very systems that I don't want to see be existing anymore. So that's a big challenge.
That's a very big challenge.
And actually, Andrew Harvey talks about that a lot. He thinks it's the greatest challenge to our sacred activism. It's like how, I mean, he might not talk about like capitalism per se, but it's like, how do we like step back from these busy lives where we think we have to buy things and uphold certain statuses. Like people want to uphold their middle class comfortable lives, but I think we're going to have to let go of some of our comforts to really get things to happen. And I see that in organizations. I see that in nonprofit organizations everywhere. We're all sort of holding on to like the right way of doing things and like the comforts and like the niceties. Not that people who work in nonprofits are like living beautiful, comfortable lives, but there's like a certain, we have to like answer to donors and we have bureaucracy and stuff like that. Not just OneSpirit. I mean, I'm talking a lot about the industries in general. So it's like, how do we change all of that? I don't know. These are big questions.
These are big questions, and these are really big challenges. And I just want to applaud you for taking those on. I think it's wonderful that you're doing this kind of work in the world, and I think the world would be a much better place if there were more people like you doing this.
Oh, well, thank you.
So now, what have been your greatest rewards in these areas that you've been working in? Because you've been in a lot of different places, you've worked with a lot of different people. And I would love to know what have been some of the high moments in what you have done.
I've really been discovering that my activism is my spiritual path. It is what fills me up and connects me to that which is most sacred. And so the big accomplishments, these high points, are really little moments where when people come over to my house and we're having a discussion about what we can do in the world, what we're, so we come together, we're sort of sharing resources and telling each other about different actions we can take and things we can do together. And this beautiful community is forming and relationships are forming and people are stepping into their most authentic selves, their most fulfilled selves, where they're really putting their hands on the world and doing it in a way that's authentic to them. It's beautiful to see that happen. And it's like exactly what I want to see in the world is actually already happening. So the more that I sort of concentrate on those experiences and seeing the camaraderie and support. I mean, every week we often have potlucks at our house, and where we'll talk about action, and then we'll just break bread and kind of chill out. Not every week, but at least once a month. And I come away from those so fulfilled because people are really, because I've just witnessed these the dozen people who have come to eat. I've just witnessed them talking about things that are really important and they're inspired and inspiring and supportive of each other. And I could just go on and on. I'm just like in awe constantly. And that is what is feeding our activism. It's not just like fixing broken systems. It's like, no, we actually already have many aspects of this new world that we all want to see. It's already happening. So it's a high point constantly.
Well, it's truly inspirational to hear you talk about it. And I can see the way that you light up and the way that this brings you so much joy and so much happiness in doing this kind of work. So if there's somebody out there listening to us now who is inspired by you the way I've been inspired by you, and they're thinking, I would like to have a little bit of that, or I would like to create a little bit of that, what kind of advice would you give to somebody who is either new to ministry or just stepping into ministry, who's looking to create something special in their lives or in their communities? What would you say to them?
Just do it. That's sort of the first thing that comes to mind. It's like, you know what, actually something that's really a piece of advice that I've heard and in different ways from different people, but I keep coming back to, is create the thing that you want. I want people around me who are telling me about things that they're doing in the world. Because I want to know what I can be doing. I want community. I want circles of people who are sharing their spirituality. I'd rather be in a spiritual setting that is facilitated rather than led. So I'm tired of, as many I can't speak for all millennials, but as many of us are leaving traditional or have already left traditional houses of worship, we're tired of that one person talking to, dozens or hundreds or however many are there. And so that's my idea of ministry. It's more just like holding space and inviting people rather than me, I'm so wise and I now have a message to get out. It's not like that for me. So anyway, I'm trying to create the things that I'm looking for. I want a spiritual community that doesn't have just one leader, I want a spiritual community where we're trying different things out. We're moving into action together, so I'm just creating the things that I want in the world,
That's awesome. So your advice is create what you want.
Yeah.
Go out in the world and create what you want. Well, I think that's very, very wise advice. And clearly it has served you quite well. So we're almost out of time here, but I was just wondering, do you have any other thoughts that you would like to share with the graduate community? Any other ideas or inspirations that you think they might find valuable or useful?
Oh man, I feel like I've talked so much already. It's interesting, for some reason, as you were asking that question, Standing Rock came up in my mind.
Yes.
And I went there in November and learned a lot about sacred activism, and that activism is an act of prayer. It's not something that happens, prayer isn't something that happens before you move into action. It is the action. And I really have been trying to take that example into the rest of my life and ask people to take things like Standing Rock as inspiration for their own lives. So it's not something that's, the battle at Standing Rock is not over, but it's not like, it happened, I didn't get to go, or, whatever your story is, take it as inspiration. This is the movement, Yes. We really have to, so take that inspiration and make it happen in your own communities,
That's awesome. That is really, really awesome. Well, Chelsea, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. You have been really, really inspirational, and you are such a wonderful and valuable member of the OneSpirit community. I think we are so lucky to have you. And I know I personally feel like we are lucky to have you, and I feel like my life is enriched every time I have the honor of working. So thank you very much for joining us. And to everyone out there, if you would like to volunteer, if you would like to become part of this wonderful community we have here, please reach out to Reverend Chelsea. She will find something wonderful for you to do. A wonderful, wonderful way for you to contribute. So thank you all for joining us. Reverend Chelsea, thank you again. It's been a pleasure as always.
Thank you. Bye, Richard.
Bye-bye.